Good morning, IMSLIC.
Morning,
I'm Sergeant Guyse. We're still here at IMSLIC, and this morning we're going to talk about sustainment operations. First thing we're going to do is we're going to play a little Jeopardy. So I want you to go ahead and keep track of the points that you get on this, and the winner at the end of this little game of Jeopardy is going to win some fabulous prizes. Try to frame your questions or your answers in the form of a question, just like they do on Jeopardy. We'll just kind of start on this side of the room, and we'll go around and pick a category, dollar amount.
Class for 400.
Class for 400, and this is classes of supply. Classes of supply. For 400, you said, sir?
Correct.
I would go here if I need things for civil programs. I would go here if I needed things for civil programs.
What is class 9?
Incorrect. That is class 10. We cannot steal answers, unfortunately, because we don't have the little clicker things to do that. We'll try. All right, sorry.
All right, I'll go with 68 whiskey for 200.
68 whiskey for 200. If I used an FLA, I would be evacuating this way.
What is my ambulance?
That is incorrect. I see lots of hands going up. The correct answer is the types of way, whether it's a medevac, casevac, or what have you. So that would be using a medevac because it's a dedicated medical vehicle. All right, next.
Let's do 68 whiskey for 400.
68 whiskey for 400. I'm responsible for the CCP at the platoon level. I'm responsible.
What is the platoon sergeant?
That is correct, Sergeant. That is correct. And platoon sergeant. All right, next.
Warfighting functions for 300.
Warfighting functions for 300. I support your 9-line medevac under which of my 3 major functions? So as a warfighting function, sustainment has 3 subcategories, 3 major subcategories. Which one of those covers 9-line medevac?
I don't know at this time, sorry.
All right. That would be health and service support. Health and service support. So just remember, anything related to sustainment that's medical is going to fall under that health and service support. All right, next.
Reports for 500.
Reports for 500. All right, Sergeant. If I needed POL, I would use this report.
I would give you a yellow 3 alpha report.
You would give me a yellow 3 report. Outstanding, Sergeant. Outstanding. 500 points to you. Next.
We'll do a form question.
We'll still give them the points.
Reports for 400.
Reports for 400. All right.
Something like daily double.
Regardless of report color, at 59%, I'm reported up as this status.
I'm going to go black, Sergeant.
That is correct. Black is correct.
What is the color black?
What is the color black?
Sorry.
And remember, when you send it up as black, if you send up a black status, that should immediately be followed by what?
Yellow report.
A resupply report. That's correct. Yep, the yellow report. All right. Next.
The band's great.
All right, next.
Reports.
Reports. I'm used for a serial number check of sensitive items.
That would be what is a green 2 report.
That is correct. And who here has heard a green 2 report called up as green 2 green? So you're calling that green 2 report up to somebody higher saying, I am green 2 green. By the Army standard, that means you have 90% at least of all your sensitive items. So just remember that next time you call it up and they're color coded that way. You are correct. That's a green 2 report. All right, and the last one.
Class for 100.
Class for 100.
Daily double.
I consist of oil, petroleum, and lube.
I'll go class 3.
That would be correct, Sergeant. All right, so go ahead and we'll tally up your scores. And at the end of class, I said I'll have prizes of fabulous nature for the winners. I'm going to read to you the terminal learning objectives. Action: conduct sustainment operations. Conditions: as a senior non-commissioned officer in a classroom environment, given modular force logistics concept version 6 and appropriate doctrine. Standards: interpret the purpose of the modular force logistic concept and tasks associated with the sustainment warfighting function. Characteristics characterize maintenance, support activities, tactical level sustainment function, and sustainment planning. Identify CASEVAC, medevac principles and procedures. Identify the elements of combat resupply and log pack operations. And identify the responsibilities of a company or troop level sustainment team. You will be informally evaluated on this course with checks on learning. You will be formally evaluated on this tomorrow morning at 08, right here in this classroom, with a 20-question test. In order to pass that exam, you have to receive 70%, which would be 14 out of 20 questions correctly, and it will be multiple choice, just like the other exams that we've taken, where you'll have a sentence or a paragraph, and there'll be something blank, and you have to choose from 4 options and put it in. So that'll be tomorrow morning at 08 here in this classroom. The overall risk assessment is low. The big risk assessment is located out there on the board if you wish to peruse it. In the event of inclement weather, where are we going to go?
Downstairs in the bathroom.
We're going to go downstairs in the bathroom, get a head count. In the event of fire, we're going to run away from the fire outside, get a head count, drive on with training. In the event of an active shooter, you can either run away from the gunfire, you can hide and barricade in place, or you can fight as your last resort. We're all stewards of our environment. We're in a building that was designed to be environmentally friendly, so please reduce, reuse, recycle. If you think globally and act locally, you can make an impact on your environment, and by all means, at all costs, avoid the local wildlife. So we're going to talk about sustainment, and it is a warfighting function, correct? It's one of our warfighting functions. Why do we think it's a warfighting function?
To maintain the fight, you have to sustain it, and as platoon sergeants, you have to get them, the boys, their beans, ammo, and all that good stuff to sustain the fight. If you lose that, you can't continue the fight.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely. You need beans and bullets. You had your hand up, Sergeant?
No, I'm good, Sergeant.
Sergeant East, why do you think?
Without, like with what Sergeant Olson was saying, without the ability to resupply the expenditures that you're going to have on the battlefield, you're going to be caught with your hands, with your pants down, and not being able to push that initiative or that battle space forward.
Right, absolutely. So do you guys remember during Unified Land Operations, I said there's a famous quote when it comes to tactics versus logistics?
Amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics.
Correct. There's a famous quote that says, amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. How am I going to resupply my army in the field? What did Napoleon do when he invaded Russia? Does anybody know how that campaign played out?
Well, he ran out of supplies and his troops, was it water?
They ran out of supplies, they didn't have water, they didn't have food. What else did they not have?
A lot of them had disease issues.
Correct. So Napoleon invaded Russia, and what tactic did the Russians employ?
Wait them out.
They did something specific. They did wait them out, but they did something specific.
Waited till for the weather, wasn't it?
Well, what they did is they did a scorched earth. They just burned everything behind them as they retrograded off the battlefield. Napoleon arrived in Moscow to a deserted, empty city with no food, no supplies. He prepared himself for a summer campaign and arrived there without equipment and uniforms and clothing and what he needed to stay warm in the winter. No food, no supplies. So it forced him to retrograde off the battlefield, leave the battlefield, and he lost thousands of soldiers in his withdrawal off the battlefield to disease and to the weather. So that's what Napoleon did. Now let's flash forward. What was Operation Barbarossa? Anybody know what Operation Barbarossa was?
Jack Sparrow.
Was that not World War II?
That is World War II.
Invasion?
What's that now,
Are
sir?
the Germans going after the Russians?
It's exactly it. So that was the Germans' plan for invading the Soviet Union at the time. What time frame? Does anybody know when the German soldiers invaded?
Winter, wasn't it? Again.
Summer.
Summer.
They invaded in summer, preparing for a summer campaign because they thought they could beat the Russians. What did the Russians do?
Waited them on.
Waited them out. They scorched the earth, retrograded off the battlefield. The Germans overran their supply lines, or their logistical tail was behind them. They couldn't get resupplied at the front. Eventually, the Germans got surrounded in Stalingrad.
Majority of conflicts that have been lost is because of the logistical aspects of not being able to get the beans and bullets and fuel and medical supplies to the forward lines where it's in dire need.
Right, absolutely. And here's two prime examples where two great armies failed doing the exact same thing, just years apart. Does anybody know who King Guy of Jerusalem is?
It's a king.
Yeah, he was a king, king of Jerusalem. What happened to him? Does anybody know? So King Guy got his armies together. He was going to go smash Saladin, brought his armies out of Jerusalem, and marched through a desert. Outran his supply lines, ran out of water. Saladin waited till his troops were depleted of food, water, and morale, and attacked and crushed his armies. So the history lessons are there. And as we determined earlier, you know, if you do the same thing over and over again the exact same way and expect a different outcome, that's the definition of insanity.
I would feel it would be up to about the Vietnam to Desert Storm arrows when we finally started to realize that ability, because even the tail end of World War II, we were falling short of resupply aspects.
That is true, but that's because we had multiple fronts at that point. But it was because of the Lend-Lease Act that we were able to resupply the Soviet Union. Germany didn't have the ability to bomb over the Ural Mountains, so they couldn't bomb the Russian industries. And so Russia was able to continue to build things, we were able to resupply them, and then eventually Germany had too many fronts with too much manpower against them with material. And that's why sustainment's important. You know, I know everybody, combat arms in this room, when we talk about to support people and we make our jokes, but without them, without that 7 odd people it takes to put one of us on the battlefield, we would fail. So I'm going to transition on over here to the actual PowerPoints. So sustainment operations and overview. So we kind of talked about it a little. For the last few hours, we've been talking about sustainment operations. And let's flash all the way back to the beginning of sustainment operations, that first slide that came up. We talked about brigade combat teams as a modular force, and how many different brigade combat teams are there? Just throw it out. Three, correct? And they're what?
Depending on which reference,
Armor.
heavy or armor, light and striker.
Infantry.
Infantry.
Infantry and striker. Yeah, no, don't fall for the light. Infantry, striker, and then armor is the current doctrinal term. It used to be heavy. Absolutely. So then we identified what those components were, who they were, the slight differences between each one, and then we got into sustainment operations as a warfighting function. And how many different categories, now I just gave you the answer, how many different major subcomponents of sustainment are there? Three. And what are those three?
Health services, logistics, and personnel services.
Right. And health services is going to be anything medical related. Logistics is going to be all your supplies, how we get it to the front, who's going to distribute it, who's going to control it. And then personnel services, just kind of think of that as your HR. That's
The band.
The band. Your band support falls under there, so they can guard your division headquarters. So we identified that. Then we kind of went into different classes of supplies. We brought up that slide that had a white sheet with a bunch of different classes on there with the operational or the terms and graphics for each one of those. How many different classes of supply are there? 10. And if it doesn't fall under any of those categories, which one does it fall under?
Miscellaneous.
10.
Falls under miscellaneous.
Yeah.
It can fall under miscellaneous. And
Well, that's 10 doesn't.
what's that?
10 covers miscellaneous.
So
Civil support or civil whatever miscellaneous.
yeah, so miscellaneous silver, but there's actually a miscellaneous category as well. So it can fall straight under miscellaneous. We all know class 6.
Yep.
Most commonly used one. But when you are doing your graphic overlays at the end of the course, feel free to use any of the graphics for any of the classes of supply you wish to. Remember, class 6 is the little stick figure guy standing there. So we talked about the different classes of supply, and then we moved on from there to talking about log packs and trains. Are log pack and the trains the same?
No.
No. Which one is gonna bring you your stuff up at the front? The log pack. The log pack comes off of the trains and brings you the stuff and then comes back to the trains. Where should the trains be?
Behind, and
One major train feature.
At a minimum. Anybody been to NTC recently? How far were your trains from you?
Couldn't even see them.
Yeah, probably 20, 30 clicks because there's no major terrain features when you're in an open desert. They need to be behind your lines. And whose artillery shoots further? Ours or the Russians?
Russian.
Right.
By a long way, so they may even be further back. So when you're requesting that resupply, those are things that need to be taken into consideration. Where is this log pack coming? And who's gonna generally be at the trains? Who's gonna be sitting on those trains?
First arm.
First sergeant's gonna be there,
XO.
XO could be there,
Splice them.
supply guy's gonna be there, and there's really one other major character that's gonna be there.
Maybe medical.
Yeah, that's right. Whoever the senior trauma specialist is in the company should be there. And then any attachments, right? We talked about that in the graphics class. When you put the little plus up here in the corner of the frame, it means you're plussed up. So maybe you have MPs attached to you. They might be back there at the log pack, or some sort of CBRN, female engagement team, something like that might be sitting back at the log pack, or excuse me, back at the trains waiting to come up if you need them. All right, so we talked about those things. We talked about the log pack, who's gonna come up. So now that log pack is coming up. They're coming up to resupply you up at the front. What are the different types of resupply that they can do? What are the different methods that we use?
Tailgate.
Tailgate, so what's tailgate?
Tailgate is where you come up to the first sergeant and get your stuff and then go back.
That's service station.
Tailgates, they come to you, drop stuff off, and then they go to the next station, or next location. They just,
Right. And those are primarily used in mounted world. If you're dismounted, you can still use those same methods, but you're gonna hear that term in position more often used, where they're bringing the bullets up to you. If you've ever seen the movie Zulu, and they show the wounded guys on the ground dragging, they can't walk anymore, but they're crawling on the ground, pulling boxes of ammunition, and they're handing the individual ammunition to the guys, that, you know, in position resupply. And then if we hit it ahead of time, what kind of planning is that?
pre-stock.
Yep, caches, pre-stock, you already have a plan. That takes more planning. You have to figure out where you're gonna be and roughly where you're gonna be there, and how can I hide it from the enemy? So they don't find it, they don't use my supplies. And of course, we also had one other one that we called a speedball earlier. Aerial. So, and stuff's falling in the air with parachutes.
Anyone can get it.
Anyone can get it. They can see where it's gonna go, so you better have a plan in place. Or when it lands 3 valleys to your right, you better have a plan in place on how you're gonna overcome that. So those supplies have now come up, we've resupplied. Guys have been on the X for a little while. You know, they've yelled their LOAs, they've provided what's our always #1 priority of work.
Security.
So they're providing security. So we now have some casualties that we need to get off of the battlefield. Questions? That concludes sustainment operations. I'm going to go ahead and release you here in a couple minutes to go about the rest of your evening. Study hall. Tomorrow morning's exam back in here, the 20 questions on that exam. Finish up anything else that you need to get finished up. And get some chow in you. And that's what we're going to do for the rest of the evening. So if you need anything from me, or if I owe anybody anything and have forgotten to do it, come let me know offline. Student leader, I'll hand the class off to you, conduct an AAR on today's training, and I'll be down in the instructor prep room, drop it off down there. If anybody needs anything from me, I'll be down there. Anybody have anything for good of the order? Questions, comments, concerns? All right, I'll